When I think about what ties all of my material together here on this channel and in my written blogs, I like to think that the common theme is freedom. That's what I really want for myself and my fellow man. And I try to contribute to that cause in my own way here through these abstract approaches. And I say abstract because it's not exactly everyday conversation. How Paul McCartney, actually died in 1966 and was replaced by William Shepard, or how Chris Cornell wasn't really the victim of suicide; he was actually murdered, or any other number of topics I talk about. Ultimately, I'm trying to reveal deception, because the great weapon that is threatening our freedom these days is propaganda and deception, and basically the war over our thoughts, to try and manufacture our consent. The individuals that want to control us, that want to oppress us, I just call it the great oppressor. They're using entertainment and these getting us in places where we would not expect to be attacked. TikTok, algorithms embedded within YouTube, or Twitter X, or whatever. And these are things we need to recognize. And it makes me think of the quote by Benjamin Franklin. He was asked, what have we got here, a republic or a monarchy? Asking about America. And he said, a republic, if you can keep it. In other words, this thing that we have here in America is very valuable, but it's also very fragile, because it needs to we need to be very vigilant. We need to stand guard and make sure that we're not being subverted, because there's always people and entities that are going to try to subvert the freedom that we have and the system that we have, 24/7. And that's the reason we need a military, and we need, strong leaders, and we need people to speak out against those individuals and those entities and those machinations that will attempt to oppress us in their covert ways that we may not see. Their current tactic is to basically manufacture our consent, get us to not even see what they're doing, and make us believe that we are free, and actually welcome the limiting of our own freedom, and making us think that, it's the exact opposite of what it actually is. It's really just all mind control in the end. Anyhow, I came across this article at the Brownstone Institute. It's at brownstone.org, actually. And man, if I had to sit down and just write one single article that summed up everything that I talk about in all my blogs, I couldn't do it better than this guy, Josh Stillman here. I'm very impressed with him. He's read everything I've read, and probably a lot more. So, I hope I don't bore you by just reading this article, and it just ties together so many important things. So I'm going to take this episode to just read this article to you, so I hope you enjoy it. The Algorithmic Age by Josh Stillman. Having explored the physical and psychological mechanisms of control in a previous article, which I highly recommend you read, by the way, and their deployment through cultural engineering in yet another article, which I also recommend you read, we now turn to their ultimate evolution, the automation of consciousness control through digital systems. In my research on the tech industrial complex, I've documented how today's digital giants weren't simply co-opted by power structures. Many were potentially designed from their inception as tools for mass surveillance and social control. From Google's origins in a DARPA-funded CIA project to Amazon's founder Jeff Bezos' family ties to ARPA, these weren't just successful startups that later aligned with government interests. What Tavistock discovered through years of careful study, emotional resonance trumps facts, pure influence outweighs authority, and indirect manipulation succeeds where direct propaganda fails, now forms the foundational logic of social media algorithms. Facebook's emotion manipulation study and Netflix A/B testing of thumbnails, explored in detail later, exemplify the digital automation of these century-old insights, as AI systems perform billions of real-time experiments, continuously refining the art of influence at an unprecedented scale. Just as Laurel Canyon, I think that's Laurel Canyon, the Laurel CC, served as a physical space for steering culture, today's digital platforms function as virtual laboratories for consciousness control, reaching further and operating with far greater precision. Social media platforms have scaled these principles through influencer amplification and engagement metrics. The discovery that indirect influence outperforms direct propaganda now shapes how platforms subtly adjust content visibility. What once required years of meticulous psychological study can now be tested and optimized in real time, with algorithms leveraging billions of interactions to perfect their methods of influence. The manipulation of music reflects a broader evolution in cultural control. What began with localized programming, like Laurel Canyon's experiments in counterculture, has now transitioned into global, algorithmically driven systems. These digital tools automate the same mechanisms, shaping consciousness on an unprecedented scale. Netflix's approach parallels Bernays' manipulation principles in digital form. Perhaps unsurprisingly, as co-founder Mark Randolph was Bernays' great-nephew and Sigmund Freud's great-grandnephew. Where Bernays used focus groups to test messaging, Netflix conducts massive A/B testing of thumbnails and titles, showing different images to different users based on their psychological profiles. Their recommendation algorithm doesn't just suggest content, it shapes viewing patterns by controlling visibility and context, similar to how Bernays orchestrated comprehensive promotional campaigns that shaped public perception through multiple channels. Just as Bernays understood how to create the perfect environment to sell products, like promoting music rooms and homes to sell pianos, Netflix crafts personalized interfaces that guide viewers towards specific content choices. Their approach to original content production similarly relies on analyzing mass psychological data to craft narratives for specific demographic segments. More insidiously, Netflix's content strategy actively shapes social consciousness through selective promotion and burial of content. While films supporting establishment narratives receive prominent placement, documentaries questioning official accounts often find themselves buried in the platform's least visible categories or excluded from recommendation algorithms entirely. Even successful films like What is a Woman faced systematic suppression across multiple platforms, demonstrating how digital gatekeepers can effectively erase challenging perspectives while maintaining the illusion of open access. I experienced this censorship firsthand. I was fortunate enough to serve as a producer for Anecdotals, directed by Jennifer Sharp, a film documenting C19V injuries. Now, if you remember, I don't say the word COVID-19, I say C19. And I don't say the word VACCINE, I say the big V. And the reason I do that is so YouTube doesn't flag this and shut me down. So, hope that's not confusing. A film documenting C19V injuries, including her own. YouTube removed it on day one, claiming individuals couldn't discuss their own V experiences. Only after Senator Ron Johnson's intervention was the film reinstated, a telling example of how platform censorship silences personal narratives that challenge official accounts. This gatekeeping extends across the digital landscape. By controlling which documentaries appear prominently, which foreign films reach American audiences, and which perspectives get highlighted in their original programming, platforms like Netflix act as cultural gatekeepers, just as Bernays managed public perception for his corporate clients. Where earlier systems relied on human gatekeepers to shape culture, streaming platforms use data analytics and recommendation algorithms to automate the steering of consciousness. The platform's content strategy and promotion systems represent Bernays' principles of psychological manipulation operating at an unprecedented scale. reality TV, engineering the self. Before social media turned billions into their own content creators, reality TV perfected the template for self-commodification. The Kardashians exemplified this transition, transforming from reality TV stars into digital age influencers. They showed how to convert personal authenticity into a marketable brand. Their show didn't just reshape societal norms around wealth and consumption, it provided a masterclass in abandoning genuine human experience for carefully curated performance. Audiences learned that being oneself was less valuable than becoming a brand, that authentic moments mattered less than engineered content, and that real relationships were secondary to networked influence. This transformation from person to persona would reach its apex with social media, where billions now willingly participate in their own behavioral modification. Users learn to suppress authentic expression in favor of algorithmic rewards, to filter genuine experience through the lens of potential content, and to value themselves not by internal measures, but through metrics of likes and shares. What reality TV pioneered, the voluntary surrender of privacy, the replacement of authentic self with marketable image, the transformation of life into content, social media would democratize at a global scale. Now anyone could become their own reality show, trading authenticity for engagement. Instagram epitomizes this transformation, training users to view their lives as content to be curated, their experiences as photo opportunities, and their memories as stories to be shared with the public. The platform's influencer economy turns authentic moments into marketing opportunities, teaching users to modify their actual behavior, where they go, what they eat, how they dress, to create content that algorithms will reward. This isn't just sharing life online, it's reshaping life itself to serve the digital marketplace. Even as these systems grow more pervasive, their limits are becoming increasingly visible. The same tools that enable manipulating cultural currents also reveal its fragility as audiences begin to challenge manipulative narratives. Cracks in the system. Despite its sophistication, the system of control is beginning to show cracks. Increasingly, the public is pushing back against blatant attempts at cultural engineering, as evidenced by current consumer and electoral rejections. Recent attempts at obvious cultural exploitation, such as corporate marketing campaigns and celebrity-driven narratives, have begun to fail, signaling a turning point in public tolerance for manipulation. When Bud Light and Target, companies with their own deep establishment connections, faced massive consumer backlash in 2023 over their social messaging campaigns, the speed and scale of the rejection marked a significant shift in consumer behavior. Major investment firms like BlackRock faced unprecedented pushback against ESG initiatives, seeing significant outflows that forced them to recalibrate their approach. Even celebrity influence lost its power to shape public opinion when dozens of A-list celebrities united behind one candidate in the 2024 election. Their coordinated endorsements not only failed to sway voters, but may have backfired, suggesting a growing public fatigue with manufactured consensus. The public is increasingly recognizing these manipulation patterns. When viral videos expose dozens of news anchors reading identical scripts about, quote, threats to our democracy, the facade of independent journalism crumbles, revealing the continued operation of systematic narrative control. Legacy media's authority is crumbling, with frequent exposures of staged narratives and misrepresented sources, revealing the persistence of centralized messaging systems. Even the fact-checking industry, designed to bolster official narratives, faces growing skepticism as people discover that these, quote, independent arbiters of truth are often funded by the very power structures they claim to monitor. The supposed guardians of truth serve instead as enforcers of acceptable thought, their funding trails leading directly to the organizations they're meant to oversee. The public awakening extends beyond corporate messaging to a broader realization that supposedly organic social changes are often engineered. For example, while most people only became aware of the Tavistock Institute through recent controversies about gender-affirming care, their reaction hints at a deeper realization that cultural shifts long accepted as natural evolution might instead have institutional authors. Though few still understand Tavistock's historical role in shaping culture since our grandparents' time, a growing number of people are questioning whether seemingly spontaneous social transformations may have been, in fact, deliberately orchestrated. This growing recognition signals a fundamental shift. As audiences become more conscious of manipulation methods, the effectiveness of these control systems begin to diminish. Yet the system is designed to provoke intense emotional responses. The more outrageous, the better. Precisely to prevent critical analysis. By keeping the public in a constant state of reactionary outrage, whether defending or attacking figures like Trump or Musk, it successfully distracts from examining the underlying power structures these figures operate within. The heightened emotional state serves as a perfect shield against rational inquiry. Before examining today's digital control mechanisms in detail, the evolution from Edison's hardware monopolies to Tavistock's psychological operations to today's algorithmic control systems reveals more than a natural historical progression. It shows how each stage intentionally built upon the last to achieve the same goal. Physical control of media distribution evolved into psychological manipulation of content, which has now been automated through digital systems. As AI systems become more sophisticated, they don't just automate these control mechanisms, they perfect them, learning and adapting in real time across billions of interactions. We can visualize how distinct domains of power, finance, media, intelligence, and culture, have converged into an integrated grid of social control. While these systems initially operated independently, they now function as a unified network, each reinforcing and amplifying the others. This framework, refined over a century, reaches its ultimate expression in the digital age, where algorithms automate what once required elaborate coordination between human authorities. The digital endgame. Today's digital platforms represent the culmination of control methods developed over the past century. Where their researchers once had to manually study group dynamics and psychological responses, AI systems now perform billions of real-time experiments, continuously refining their influence techniques through massive data analysis and behavioral tracking. What Thomas Edison achieved through physical control of films, modern tech companies now accomplish through algorithms and automated content moderation. The convergence of surveillance, algorithms, and financial systems represents not just an evolution in technique, but an escalation in scope. This convergence appears by design. Consider that Facebook launched the same day DARPA shut down LifeLog, their project to track a person's entire existence online. Or that major tech platforms now employ numerous former intelligence operatives in their, quote, trust and safety teams, determining what content gets amplified or suppressed. Social media platforms capture detailed behavioral data, which algorithms analyze to predict and shape user actions. This data increasingly feeds into financial systems through credit scoring, targeted advertising, and emerging central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. Together, these create a closed loop where surveillance refines targeting, shapes economic incentives, and enforces compliance with dominant order norms at the most granular level. This evolution manifests in concrete ways. Edison's infrastructure monopoly became platform ownership. Tavistock's psychology studies became social media algorithms. Operation Mockingbird's media infiltration became automated content moderation. The Hays Code's moral controls became community guidelines. More specifically, Edison's original blueprint for control evolved into digital form. His control of production equipment became platform ownership and cloud infrastructure. Theater distribution control became algorithmic visibility. Patent enforcement became terms of service. Financial blacklisting became demonetization. His definition of authorized content became community standards. Edison's patent monopoly allowed him to dictate which films could be shown and where, just as today's tech platforms use terms of service, IP rights, and algorithmic visibility to determine what content reaches audiences. Where Edison could simply deny theaters access to films, modern platforms can quietly reduce visibility through shadow banning or demonetization. This evolution from manual to algorithmic control reflects a century of refinement. Where the Hays Code explicitly banned content, AI systems now subtly deprioritize it. Where Operation Mockingbird required human editors, recommendation algorithms now automatically shape information flow. The mechanisms haven't disappeared. They've become invisible, automated, and far more effective. The C-19 pandemic demonstrated how thoroughly and quickly modern control systems could manufacture consensus and enforce compliance. Within weeks, established scientific principles about natural immunity, outdoor transmission, and focused protection were replaced by a new orthodoxy. Social media algorithms were programmed to amplify fear-based content while suppressing alternative viewpoints, while news outlets coordinated messaging to maintain narrative control, and financial pressures ensured institutional compliance. Just as Rockefeller's early capture of medical institutions shaped the boundaries of acceptable knowledge a century ago, the pandemic response demonstrated how thoroughly this system could activate in a crisis. The same mechanisms that once defined scientific versus alternative medicine now determined which public health approaches could be discussed and which would be systematically suppressed. The Great Barrington Declaration scientists found themselves erased, not just through typical censorship, but through the invisible hand of algorithmic suppression. Their views buried in search results, their discussions flagged as misinformation, their professional reputations questioned by coordinated media campaigns. This trifecta of suppression rendered dissenting perspectives effectively invisible, demonstrating how modern platforms can converge with state power to erase opposition while maintaining the illusion of independent oversight. Most users never realize what they're not seeing. The most effective censorship is invisible to its targets. Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter offered a crack of light, exposing previously hidden practices like shadow banning and algorithmic content suppression through the release of the Twitter files. These revelations demonstrated how thoroughly platforms had integrated government influence into their moderation policies, whether through direct pressure or voluntary compliance, erasing dissent under the guise of, quote, maintaining community standards. Yet even Musk acknowledged the limits of free expression within this framework, stating that, quote, freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom of reach. This admission underscores the enduring reality. Even under new leadership, platforms remain bound by the algorithms and incentives that shape visibility, influence, and economic viability. Perhaps the ultimate expression of this evolution is the proposed introduction of central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, which transform social control mechanisms into financial infrastructure. The merger of ESG metrics with digital currency creates unprecedented granular control. Every purchase, every transaction, every economic choice becomes subject to automated social compliance scoring. This fusion of financial surveillance with behavioral control represents the ultimate expression of the control systems that began with Edison's physical monopolies. By embedding surveillance into currency itself, governments and corporations gain the ability to monitor, restrict, and manipulate transactions based on compliance with official criteria. From carbon usage limits to diversity metrics to social credit scores. These systems could render dissent not just punishable, but economically impossible, restricting access to basic necessities like food, housing, and transportation for those who fail to comply with approved behaviors. What began with Tavistock's careful study of mass psychology, tested through Facebook's crude emotion experiments, and perfected through modern algorithmic systems, represents more than a century of evolving social control. each stage built upon the last, from physical monopolies to psychological manipulation to digital automation. Today's social media platforms don't just study human behavior, they shape it algorithmically, automating mass psychological manipulation through billions of daily interactions. Unplugging from the matrix, a path back to reality. Understanding these systems is the first step towards liberation. As the machinery of control reaches its peak, so too does the opportunity for resistance. The endgame for centralized power presents a paradox. The same systems designed to limit freedom also expose their own vulnerabilities. While the evolution from Edison's physical monopolies to today's invisible algorithmic controls may feel overwhelming, it reveals a crucial truth. These mechanisms are constructed, and what is constructed can be dismantled or circumvented. We can already see glimmers of resistance. As I've observed in my investigation of big tech's origins, people are increasingly demanding transparency and authenticity. And once they see these control systems, they don't unsee them. Public backlash against obvious ideological sculpting, from corporate virtue signaling campaigns to platform censorship, suggests an awakening to these methods of control. The public rejection of corporate news networks in favor of independent journalism, the mass exodus from manipulative social media platforms to decentralized alternatives, and the growing movement towards local community building all demonstrate how awareness leads to action. The rise of platforms committed to free speech, even within centralized systems, shows that alternatives to algorithmic manipulation are possible. By championing transparency, reducing reliance on automated content moderation, and supporting the open exchange of ideas, these platforms challenge the status quo and push back against the dominance of centralized narratives. Building on these principles, truly decentralized networks represent our best hope for resistance. By eliminating gatekeepers entirely, they offer the greatest potential to counter hierarchical control and empower authentic expression. The battle for freedom of consciousness is now our most fundamental struggle. Without it, we are not autonomous actors but non-player characters, NPCs, in someone else's game, making seemingly free choices within carefully constructed parameters. Each time we question an algorithmic recommendation or seek out independent voices, we crack the control matrix. When we build in-person local communities and support decentralized platforms, we create spaces beyond algorithmic manipulation. These aren't just acts of resistance, they're steps toward reclaiming our autonomy as conscious human actors rather than programmed NPCs. The choice between authentic consciousness and programmed behavior requires daily discernment. We can passively consume curated content or actively seek diverse perspectives. We can accept algorithmic suggestions or consciously choose our information sources. We can isolate ourselves in digital bubbles or build real-world communities of resistance. Our liberation begins with recognition. These systems of control, though powerful, are not inevitable. They were constructed and they can be dismantled. By embracing creativity, fostering authentic connection, and restoring our sovereignty, we don't just resist the control matrix, we reclaim our fundamental right to author our own destiny. The future belongs to those aware enough to see the system, brave enough to reject it, and creative enough to build something better. Essential resources for understanding power and influence. And there's a really good list of books here, many of which I've talked about right here on this blog, that I would highly recommend looking at. This one's very interesting right here. Miles Copeland, a relative of Stuart Copeland of The Police, The Game of Nations, former CIA operative. Edward Bernays' Propaganda, that's the name that was mentioned earlier. Jay Dyer is someone I've mentioned a lot. That guy's really good. He's responsible for a lot of that Stanley Kubrick stuff that I talk about in the movies. Memoirs of Billy Shears, of course, I've mentioned a lot. Paul Williams, that's the guy that goes under the name Sage of Quay online. Now, I've said before that it is my belief that the ultimate Antichrist is the birth of artificial man, or the artificial life form, the robot that becomes conscious, or what have you. It's sort of the ultimate blasphemy in the face of the Creator. But of course, if you don't believe in God, that may not mean much to you. So I just think it's worth considering the spiritual ramifications of all this. Ultimately, you're going to need help in this spiritual warfare. I don't think our intellect alone is going to be enough. So I hope you enjoyed that. I am still working on a new Paul is Dead themed video blog, as well as a blog on Sid Barrett. Before closing this out, I just want to digress briefly on this kind of interesting thing I've noticed over the years, that when you type www.antifa.com into the address bar into your browser, look where it goes. Now, I did this, if you've been here for a while, watching my channel for a few years, I've mentioned before that I think it was back in 2019, I typed this in and it went to the Joe Biden campaign website. And then after Joe Biden became president, it went to the White House page. It redirected there. So now where does it go? Now that Joe Biden is not president, I'm going to type it in real time and I'm going to show you where it goes. Right, so the page is down, but it goes to buildbackbetter.gov. Build Back Better, that was Joe Biden's phrase. We're going to build back better. A governmental page, that's kind of strange. Anyways, I just thought I would leave on that note.